Imagine, signing a €500 million check to a totally foreign company to buy brand new trains, while at the exact same time, the only train factory in your own country is just starving to death.
Yeah,
And it's a factory that your government actually partially owns, and it's just sitting there 400 kilometers away doing nothing.
Yeah, it sounds completely absurd, like a thought experiment or something.
Exactly, but this isn't hypothetical. This is exactly what went down in Ukraine on May 6th, 2026. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we're really getting into the weeds of this massive structural paradox.
We really are. Because on that specific date in May, Kyiv decided to just go ahead and borrow 290 million euros from European banks.
Yeah.
And this was to purchase 224 brand new metro cars.
Right, and that's just the immediate loan, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's just the tip of the iceberg. When you look at the total scale of the project, I mean, you've got 150 million from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, plus another 140 million from the European Investment Bank, the EIB, and then, local funds on top of that.
Wow.
So the total cost actually exceeds 520 million euros. It is literally the largest single purchase of rolling stock in the entire history of the Kyiv underground.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what is truly staggering to me is just how this whole thing was authorized. Like, you'd think for a €500 million commitment, there'd be, massive civic debates.
You would think so.
Yeah, public hearings, town halls, something. But no, it was enacted by a single signature.
Yep. Disposition number 97.
Exactly. Just one signature by the city's executive body, and poof, that money is essentially set to flow straight out of the country.
And meanwhile, down in Kremenchuk, you have this massive domestic facility, the Kryukiv Railway Car Works, or KVBZ for short.
Right. The only plant in the country that can even build these things.
Exactly. They are an institution. I mean, they are older than independent Ukraine itself. But right now, their assembly lines are just halted.
Completely frozen. I mean, the sources say that by the spring of 2026, KVBZ was basically forced to announce a shutdown. They had to move all their workers into, idle time.
Yeah. And the primary reason for that is Ukrzaliznytsia, the state railway, just hadn't paid them.
Wait, they hadn't paid them for work they already did.
Exactly. For wagons that KVBZ had already manufactured and delivered over the past year, they just didn't get paid.
That is brutal.
It gets worse. The 2026 state budget actually allocated absolutely zero funds for new passenger rail cars.
Wow, zero.
Zero. So you have this domestic plant just bleeding out financially. They dropped from an 81 million hryvnia profit in 2024 to this massive 125 million hryvnia loss in 2025.
It's like taking out a 30-year mortgage in a foreign currency, right?
Yeah.
Just to pay your neighbor to fix your roof.
Yeah.
While your own brother, who is literally a professional roofer, is sitting in your living room asking for a small loan to buy groceries.
That's a great way to put it.
The money leaves the house, never comes back, and you still have to figure out how to feed your brother. But let me push back on this just slightly.
Sure.
Because fundamentally, KVBZ is a private company, right? Yeah. So why is it really the state's problem if a private entity fails to secure a municipal contract? That's just business.
Well, what's fascinating here is the twist in the ownership narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Because the state actually is an owner.
Wait, really?
Yeah. According to the documented timeline in our sources, in April 2026, which is just weeks before Kyiv signed this huge new European loan, the State Property Fund officially acquired a 25.07% stake in KVBZ.
Over a quarter of the plant.
Exactly. They got those shares after the high anti-corruption court seized them from a sanctioned Russian businessman.
So, let me get this straight. One hand of the state takes ownership of a quarter of the plant.
Right.
And then, almost immediately, the other hand signs a document completely bypassing that exact same plant to send €500 million to foreign competitors.
That is exactly what happened.
Did KVBZ even attempt to bid on these metro cars? I mean, were they even in the running?
Oh, they were. In fact, they actually won a tender for these exact cars back in 2023.
Wait, they won it?
Yeah. They submitted a bid that was 37% cheaper than their main European competitor, Skoda.
37%. That is a massive difference.
Huge. It was a contract worth over 79 million euros.
Yeah.
And it was backed by the EBRD. But then, the harsh reality of trying to operate a global supply chain during a war really hit them.
Oh, right. Because they rely on foreign parts.
Exactly. They're absolutely vital supplier for traction equipment. A Spanish company called CAF. They reportedly just backed out. They cited overloaded production lines.
Okay, but in any normal business scenario, wouldn't you just go out and find a new supplier? There have to be other companies that make traction equipment.
You would think so. And KVBZ did. They proposed alternative suppliers from Poland, from Japan. But international banking rules are just incredibly rigid. The EBRD flat out refused the substitution.
Really?
Well, from the bank's perspective, changing a key supplier fundamentally alters the risk profile. It changes the essential terms of the contract they originally agreed to finance. You can't just bait and switch critical components on an internationally funded project.
I guess that makes sense from a banking standpoint, but...
Right, but because of that rigidity, the Metro canceled the entire contract. KVBZ sued, but by late 2024, the domestic factory had lost its final appeal in court.
But surely a country fighting a war has some kind of laws designed to protect its own strategic industries from this exact kind of scenario. We hear this constant rhetoric from politicians about the necessity of supporting local manufacturing. So how does a bid that is 37% cheaper just get legally tossed aside?
This is exactly where we bring in the core of today's deep dive. We are guiding this discussion heavily on the extensive research of Viacheslav Morgun.
Right, the municipal law expert.
Exactly. He's a Ph.D. in law, specifically focusing on municipal law and municipal economics. And he's the developer of this really innovative legal framework, the single legal entity of public law - economic entity model.
Which we are definitely going to get into later as the solution.
Oh, absolutely. But first, Morgan outlines why this happens. He calls it a zone of incompatibility. Basically, there are three fiercely conflicting doctrines operating at the exact same time.
Okay, what's the first doctrine?
The first one is Ukraine's localization law. It's law number 1977-IX, and it mandates that for public procurement, a certain percentage of the manufacturing for items like metro cars absolutely must be done within Ukraine.
Which sounds great. That sounds like the exact protection KVBZ needs.
It would be, except there is a massive loophole written directly into the text of the law.
Oh, of course there is.
Yeah. The law explicitly states that localization requirements do not apply to purchases made with funds from international financial organizations.
You're kidding.
Nope. The second you use an EBRD or EIB loan, all that domestic protection just evaporates entirely.
Why would lawmakers write a loophole that defeats the whole purpose of the law?
Because of the second doctrine. The rules of the banks themselves. Institutions like the EBRD and the EIB, they demand open international tenders. Their primary directive is to maximize competition, ensure complete transparency, and prevent any sort of national protectionism.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If these European banks demand open international tenders specifically to prevent corruption, isn't that ultimately a good thing for the public? I mean, we want clean money, right? We want to make sure these massive €500 million funds aren't just quietly handed over to some local crony behind closed doors.
And in a peacetime, completely stable economy, that logic is perfectly sound. But Morgan points out that it conflicts directly with the third doctrine, economic sovereignty.
The survival of wartime industries.
Exactly. When you force an open international tender right now, you are putting a foreign manufacturer who is operating in a completely safe, stable environment up against a struggling domestic plant. A plant that has to deal with constant blackouts, severe labor shortages, and totally delayed subcomponents because of wartime logistics.
Right. It's not a level playing field at all.
It's structurally disadvantaged from day one. So the very rules that were designed to keep the money clean, they actually end up inadvertently scrubbing the domestic economy entirely out of the picture.
So it feels like a total trap. A city basically either accepts the foreign loan and just suffocates its own factories, or it tries to protect the factory and loses the funding to buy the trains it desperately needs.
It definitely feels that way.
Yeah.
But Morgan's research highlights this very specific sort of hidden mechanism within EU law itself that could actually resolve this. It's known as the in-house principle, or the Teckal doctrine.
The Teckal doctrine, I'm not familiar with that. How does that bypass an open tender?
Right, so it stems from this landmark ruling by the European Court of Justice. Basically, under EU public procurement directives, if a public body, let's say a city government, if they control an entity essentially as its own internal department,
okay,
and that entity does the vast majority of its work for that specific public body, then contracting with them isn't considered a breach of competition law. It's legally treated as just an internal transfer of resources.
Oh, wow. So you don't need a tender because you're basically just hiring yourself.
Exactly. But the thing is, would the European banks actually allow a city to use that mechanism for these specific loans?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Well, the EIB explicitly aligns its procurement policies with EU law. And EU law absolutely sanctions the Teckal doctrine. So the true barrier here isn't a legal prohibition.
Then what is it?
It's a profound lack of political will and bureaucratic imagination. The city and the state would have to proactively design and negotiate this complex structure with the European banks. And instead, they just took the path of least resistance.
Which is accepting an open tender that just defaults to foreign suppliers.
Precisely.
You know, when we throw around numbers like €500 million, it's really easy to just abstract it. It sounds like monopoly money transferring between, a European bank, a city government, and some foreign corporation.
Oh, for sure.
But if you are a taxpayer listening to this right now, you are getting hit with this bill from 3 entirely different directions, aren't you?
Oh, it is a devastating triple payment for the average citizen. The research breaks this down so clearly. Let's start with the most immediate hit, paying as a passenger.
Okay.
So the fare for the Kyiv metro has been frozen at 8 hryvnias since 2020. But starting in July 2026, it is projected to jump to 30 hryvnias.
30, that is nearly a 400% increase overnight.
And remarkably, it still doesn't even cover the true operational cost.
Wait, what?
Yeah, according to the Metro's own internal financial plan, the actual cost of a single ride in 2026 is 64.53 hryvnias.
Oh my God. Over 64 hryvnias per ride.
Right. So the city has to heavily subsidize the difference. But now the city has to layer the servicing of this massive new European loan on top of that already gaping deficit. So you as the commuter, you pay way more at the turnstile, and the city still bleeds cash.
So the commuter gets squeezed hard. What is the second way this hits the public?
The second payment is extracted from you as a taxpayer. Look, when a city places a €500 million order with a foreign company, it results in single payment capital flight. The currency just leaves Ukraine's borders, and it never returns.
Gone forever.
Exactly. Contrast that with what happens if the order goes to a domestic factory like KVBZ. Morgan's economic analysis points out that internal orders have this powerful multiplier effect. They return roughly 25 to 40% of the contract's total value directly back into state and local budgets.
Right, because of the income tax collected from all those factory workers, the corporate taxes, the VAT on the entire local supply chain, all the social contributions.
Exactly. But when you purchase abroad, that localized return on investment is exactly zero. And that capital flight leads directly to the third payment for the public, funding the fallout of unemployment.
The social cost.
Yeah. If KVBZ is allowed to just close permanently, the thousands of engineers, welders, technicians who lose their jobs, they don't just disappear. The state, which means you, the taxpayer, is legally obligated to step in and fund their unemployment benefits.
Retraining programs, social assistance.
All of it, just to prevent the total collapse of a municipal economy like Kremenchuk.
So the mechanics of this are just brutal. You pay a massively inflated fare to send your tax dollars out of the country. You forfeit the 40% local tax return that could have literally funded your own city. And then you get taxed again to support the unemployed workers whose jobs your city just exported.
It is a cycle that completely drains municipal resilience.
And what I find deeply, deeply troubling in the source material is looking at the breakdown of that 64 hryvnia true cost of a metro ride. Almost 40% of that cost, and some analysts from the NGO Holka actually argue it's closer to 58%. But anyway, a massive chunk of that fare is classified as a depreciation component.
Right, meaning that portion of the fare is theoretically ring-fenced, specifically to update, maintain, and repair the physical infrastructure.
But the infrastructure is failing catastrophically. I mean, the sources document that in early 2026, the ceilings literally collapsed at both the Teremki and Chernihivska stations.
Yeah, that was shocking.
And a major tunnel on the Blue Line severely flooded back in 2023. They're estimating it will cost almost 2 billion hryvnias just to repair one stretch of track. So how does a municipality justify taking on a €500 million loan for shiny new train cars when the very tunnels they're going to drive through are literally caving in on the passengers?
The misalignment of priorities is stark. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most dangerous element of this entire equation is the long-term currency risk.
Okay, break that down for us.
We are talking about a 25 to 30-year loan, taken out entirely in euros. And the interest rate is structured as Euribor, plus a margin of up to 5.75%.
Wait, hold on. For those of us who don't spend our days tracking foreign exchange markets, Euribor is basically the baseline interest rate that European banks charge each other to lend money, right?
Exactly.
So we are talking about a variable floating rate that could spike depending on the European economy.
Precisely. It is not a fixed, predictable cost at all.
Yeah.
And that variability is heavily compounded by the exchange rate, because right now the Ukrainian hryvnia is relatively stable, but that stability is heavily, artificially supported by unprecedented external wartime financial aid.
Right.
So the critical question is, what happens when the war eventually ends, or when that external aid inevitably scales back?
The hryvnia weakens significantly against the euro.
It weakens dramatically. And a weak hryvnia means this euro-denominated debt will absolutely explode in local currency terms. I mean, 10 or 15 years from now, the city of Kyiv will be paying exponentially more hryvnias just to service the exact same loan principal. It has the potential to completely devour the city's operational budget.
And when a single massive loan eats the municipal budget, there is no money left for local schools, no money for hospitals, no money for road repair. That 30 hryvnia fare projection we talked about, that isn't the ceiling. It is just the first step on a very long, very steep staircase. They will have no choice but to continuously hike the price of a ride.
This is exactly why the common argument you hear that the state simply has no money to support local factories is heavily scrutinized by Morgan. It is not merely an issue of lacking funds, it is an issue of how the existing funds are managed and where they are permitted to leak out of the system.
And we cannot discuss where the money goes without addressing the severe corruption backdrop detailed in the research. And I just want to be absolutely clear to everyone listening right now. We are strictly citing the documented official investigations provided in our sources here. We're impartially reporting the facts exactly as they have been laid out by investigative journalists and anti-corruption bureaus.
Absolutely. The context surrounding the management of these funds is highly significant. For example, the former chief of the Kyiv Metro, Viktor Brahinsky, who ran the enterprise for a decade, he resigned after investigative journalists exposed a massive, entirely unexplained increase in his family's assets.
Unexplained assets totaling roughly $1.5 million.
Right. And following this exposure, he was officially served a notice of suspicion for official negligence, specifically related to the flooded tunnel we discussed earlier.
But he never actually stood trial for that negligence, did he?
No. According to the source material, he fled abroad, utilizing falsified medical documents, and he has been on the wanted list for over a year now. Furthermore, his first deputy is currently facing allegations of official negligence for severely overpaying a Russian supplier back in 2014.
Oh, wow.
And ironically, that overpayment was made using funds from a previous EBRD loan.
And this leakage, it isn't just confined to the metro. Ukrzaliznytsia, the state railway, the one that claimed it couldn't find the funds to pay the Kremenchuk factory for completed work, they have had massive corruption cases brought against them by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. We are talking about over 140 million hryvnias in documented damages from cable procurement schemes alone.
Just cables.
Just cables. And another 64 million lost by artificially inflating the prices of food supplies.
Therefore, the prevailing narrative that the state is simply too impoverished to sustain its domestic manufacturing base is fundamentally challenged here. Immense sums of money are systematically lost to extreme inefficiencies and alleged corruption. The capital exists. It is just bleeding out of the system before it ever reaches the factory floor.
And this bleeding results in a very specific, tragic trajectory for Ukrainian industry. The sources draw a direct comparison between the current state of KVBZ and past industrial giants in Kyiv, specifically the Bolshevik plant and Electron-Mash.
Right. Those plants serve as the literal textbook definition of deindustrialization. They were massive facilities that were simply allowed to decay over decades. They were starved to state orders, their machinery aged, and they were permitted to die until they were essentially just empty husks sitting on highly valuable urban land.
Just waiting to be stripped.
Yeah. For instance, the Bolshevik plant was sold at privatization in 2021 for 1.43 billion hryvnias.
But the buyers didn't purchase it to manufacture anything.
No, absolutely not. They purchased 35 hectares of prime real estate right in central Kyiv. The buyers wanted the land for commercial development. The heavy machinery and the industrial potential were effectively scrapped.
So it's a real estate play.
Exactly. And the research emphasizes that KVBZ unlike those other plants, has actually survived all these years. It kept engineering, it kept producing, it modernized its designs. Therefore, if it dies now, it isn't an accident of history or mere negligence. It is an active choice by the state, executed through a combination of unpaid debts and actively bypassing the plant for foreign loans.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually fix this? How does a municipality escape this trap where banking rules force you to buy foreign, the resulting loans crush you with unpredictable currency risk, and your own factories are left to rust? This is where we need to dive into Viacheslav Morgun's specific framework.
Yes. Morgun proposes a fundamental redesign of ownership and procurement. As a specialist in municipal law and municipal economics, he developed what he calls the Single Legal Entity of Public Law-Economic Entity Model, or the SLEPL-EE model for short.
Okay, wait, hold on. Are we really suggesting that local city bureaucrats should be put in direct charge of a highly technical, massive industrial train plant? Isn't that just trading one type of state inefficiency for another type of municipal inefficiency?
It is a totally valid concern, but the model isn't about the mayor suddenly going down there and turning wrenches or dictating engineering tolerances.
Right.
It is about a structural, legal integration.
Yeah.
Currently, the territory community, meaning the citizens of a city, they act like an outside shareholder to these municipal enterprises with very little direct oversight. Under the SLEPL-EE model, a strategic factory like KVBZ wouldn't just be a joint stock company floating aggressively out there in the private market.
What would it be?
It would be integrated as a direct structural unit of the Kremenchuk Territorial community, legally housed under their Department of Industry. The engineering and the operational management remains completely professional, but the entity itself becomes wholly public.
Okay, I think I understand how that changes the ownership structure. But how does that actually solve Kyiv's problem? How does that help the capital buy the trains it needs without violating the rules of the European loans?
This raises an important question, and it's the genius of the model. By establishing that public legal structure, the municipality triggers that hidden EU mechanism we discussed earlier, the Teckal doctrine.
Ah, the in-house exception.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If the territorial community of Kremenchuk controls the factory as a public entity serving the public interest, they can partner directly with the territorial community of Kyiv.
So it just becomes direct community-to-community cooperation.
Exactly. One public entity producing a public good and another public entity purchasing it. Because they are both public entities operating outside of standard commercial market dynamics, this direct transfer doesn't violate EU anti-competition laws. It completely bypasses the need for an open international tender that inherently disadvantages the local producer.
That is brilliant. It cuts out the middlemen entirely. There is no tender margin. There's no shell companies inflating the price to skim a profit. The tax revenue generated from the Kremenchuk factory workers stays right there in Kremenchuk to fund their local hospitals, their schools, their infrastructure.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Kyiv gets the exact metro cars it needs at a substantially lower domestic price without exporting €500 million of vital capital out of the country.
Morgun highlights that this model fundamentally shifts Kyiv's role in the national economy.
Yeah.
Right now, Kyiv often acts as a massive sinkhole that simply consumes the country's budget and external loans.
Yeah.
But by implementing the SLEPL-EE model, it steps up to become a true capital. It utilizes its immense purchasing power to actively sustain and develop the regional economies that hold the entire country together.
It requires a complete paradigm shift in how public officials view procurement. I mean, snapping up cheap European money without building the frameworks to protect your domestic industry isn't a shortcut to modernization.
No, it's not.
If you aren't careful, it is a fast track to deindustrialization and crushing municipal debt. You get shiny new trains today, but your children inherit a massive euro-denominated debt and an economy that doesn't even have the capacity to build its own infrastructure.
And, you know, the author leaves us with a very stark, very grounded epilogue to consider here. When those new trains eventually arrive in Kyiv, whether they are manufactured in the Czech Republic, Switzerland, or somewhere else, they will undoubtedly be quiet, modern, and bright. The average passenger riding them to work won't be thinking about fluctuating interest rates or Euribor margins.
Or the massive factory 400 kilometers away that's just sitting completely empty.
Right. They will just be happy the train is on time, but they also won't be thinking about the engineers. If a country gets used to exporting its capital to build foreign economies, instead of building its own trains, what kind of country is it building for tomorrow?
That's the real question.
The brilliant engineers, the master welders, the specialized designers, they won't just sit around in empty factories. They will take their families and move to Poland or Germany or France to build their railways. And when the war ends and the monumental task of rebuilding Ukraine truly begins, will there even be a domestic engineering school left to do it?
That is a deeply provocative thought. It really forces you to question what exactly is being sacrificed for the sake of just checking the boxes on an international loan. The next time your city announces a massive multi-million-dollar modernization project, look past the press release, look at where that money is actually flowing, and what local industries might be quietly starving in the shadows of that signature. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.